I would like to thank Alicia Silva and Sarah Arndt for proposing this session as a workshop that has now been adapted into a keynote. I'll give you a quick summary. In this keynote, we're going to hear from both local and national groups organizing to build community, redefine power, and transform our food system for all. They share the successes and challenges farm workers and their families face as they resist corporate industrial agriculture, racism, and patriarchy in our food system, especially amid the COVID pandemic and effects of climate change. We are grateful to introduce Margaret Reeves as the moderator for this keynote. Margaret is based in Oakland, California, and is a senior scientist with the Pesticide Action Network, North America. Since the early 1980s, she has worked in support of farm worker rights as a member of New World Agriculture and Ecology Group, and is a founding board member of the Equitable Food Initiative. At PAN, Pesticide Action Network, Margaret focuses on regenerative, climate-friendly agriculture and environmental health and justice, with an emphasis on farm worker health and safety. With that, let's start the presentation.
To EcoFarm 2021 and to this keynote session on farm workers on the front line, connecting our struggles for liberation. I am Margaret Reeves, Senior Scientist at Pesticide Action Network. I am delighted to be here in this session. I've been to many EcoFarm conferences, and I think this might be the first one that is featuring farm workers in a keynote session. So thank you, EcoFarm, and thank you to our guests today. I will not belabor the point about this because our experts will tell you everything you need to know, and then we will have some great discussion following the presentations. We're going to start with two of our comrades from Coalition of Immokalee Workers. First, we'll hear from Gerardo Reyes Chavez. Gerardo is a senior staff member with the award-winning human rights organization Coalition of Immokalee Workers, CIW. And Gerardo and our other guest, Marley, will tell you more about CIW, so I'll just give you a word about Gerardo and Marley. Mr. Reyes is a farm worker and has worked in the field since age 11. First as a peasant farmer in Mexico, and then in the fields of Florida, picking oranges, tomatoes, blueberries, and watermelon. Mr. Reyes has worked with consumer allies to organize national actions in the Campaign for Fair Food. As part of the implementation of the Fair Food Program, Mr. Reyes conducts worker rights education with thousands of farm workers on participating tomato farms. I'll go ahead and give you an introduction to Marley, and then Gerardo and Marley will just give their presentations without interruption. So Marley Monticello, also with CIW, is a staff member with a decade of experience working in the fair food movement. In addition to assisting with Know Your Rights training within the CIW's Fair Food Program, Ms. Monticello has served as liaison and interpreter between workers, employers, and law enforcement, assisting with the investigation of forced labor and sexual violence cases occurring on farms outside of the Fair Food Program. She also helps to develop and coordinate CIW's communications work, as well as collaborations with workers from a range of industries and regions, which center on the expansion of the worker-driven social responsibility model. Again, I want to thank Gerardo and Marley very much for being with us today. Look forward to hearing from you and some discussion afterwards. So take it away, Gerardo.
Thank you so much for the invitation and for this introduction. We're really happy to be here today. And well, I'm going to start by sharing a little bit about who is the Coalition of Immokalee Workers. We are a community organization based in the southwest part of Florida, which is the community of Immokalee, 40 minutes inland from some of the richest cities in the county, like Naples, and also Fort Myers. And as a community, we are formed by workers mainly from Mexico, Guatemala, and Haiti, and some workers from Central America too, that are part of the people that participate and make most of our organization. We're fighting to improve wages and working conditions in the fields. And this fight started since 1993. For the first almost a decade, the Coalition of Immokalee Workers was fighting to push the industry to sit at the table to talk about how to eliminate situations of wage theft, situations of sexual assault that was happening, according to a study that came up in 2010, if I'm not mistaken, by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Around 90% of farm worker women go through situations of sexual harassment and or sexual assault, along with these situations of violence in the fields, and in the most extreme cases, conditions of modern day slavery, where workers were forced to work at gunpoint, in some of these cases, under threats of death against them and their families in some of these cases too. We have worked on this for many, many years. I got involved in 1999 because of the work that the coalition did on the second case of modern day slavery. There were many actions, and I'm not going to get into all of that. Everyone who's organizing know that it's a ton of work to put actions together. There were a ton of them in the 90s, regional strikes, hunger strike by 6 members, just to mention a few of the most important ones that basically brought the community together to search for an end to all the abusive conditions that were happening in the industry forever, for generations. So in order to find an answer to transform the industry, we needed to widen our scope. And that's where we started to focus on the market. We created something, and I'm gonna ask Marley to go a little bit back on what the Campaign for Fair Food is that brought us here. But through focusing on the big buyers of the tomatoes and bringing this, the theory of change that we started with when we asked Taco Bell to join us in an effort to eliminate by conditioning the purchases to the implementation of a code of conduct that would eventually become what we call now the Fair Food Program. So we had, at that point, reach out to consumers. We had, be pushing this idea that if consumers, if the market work together, we would be able to convince the tomato growers and the agricultural industry to also do different, because the power of the market was going to be with us. So those were the things that we had in mind. We demanded at the beginning 1 penny more per every pound that Taco Bell buys. We also demanded the zero tolerance policy for modern day slavery, which now includes zero tolerance for child labor, but also sexual assault. And when we started, we were absolutely alone. In that journey is that we met with a lot of people, but I'm gonna ask Marley to share a little bit about that. We have, in a span of about 15 years since the first agreement in 2005, basically with Taco Bell, we have been able to build something that has no parallels in terms of worker power within their workplace. And the protections that we have are proven, they work, and we want to expand them. But we got there by working together with consumers to create the worker-driven social responsibility model that we have today, that we are also working to implement in other realities. But before we get there, I'm going to ask Marley to share a little bit about what the Campaign for Fair Food was from your perspective.
Yes. So thank you again for having us. Thank you for this opportunity. As Gerardo mentioned, the core of the CIW's work is that it is a worker-driven model. Was born, raised, and continues to be led from the farm worker community here in Immokalee, even as the Fair Food Program and the worker-driven social responsibility model touches workers not only all over the United States, but also all over the world. But we are still rooted very much here in Immokalee. So over a decade ago, I had the opportunity to come to Immokalee as one of the tens of thousands of consumers who has been mobilized by the CIW, educated, and then taken action to ensure that farm workers who are harvesting our food have the rights that they deserve. And that's really what the formula of the CIW is consciousness plus commitment equals change. So we all have to be aware of the systems that we're operating in, that we're living in, that we're participating in. But then we have to go beyond knowledge. We have to take action. And that is what has driven the campaign for fair food that has won these 14 legally binding agreements with some of the world's largest food retailers. We're talking about Walmart, Whole Foods, McDonald's, these huge players who have, because of the partnership between this worker-driven organization and countless consumers all across the country, young people, people of faith, people from the sustainable food movement, who've come together and collected their voices and demanded fair food. And so because of that demand, because of that organizing, these rights that farm workers have through the Fair Food Program are actually enforced. And that's really when Gerardo says we have something that is unparalleled, that's what he's talking about, is not only the worker-driven element that's also critically important to the success of the model, but also the fact that it's enforced. So these are rights that farm workers have, that zero tolerance for sexual assault, those protections against wage theft and health and safety issues. Those aren't just words on paper. They are actually enforced, which, as anybody who's worked in farm worker advocacy knows, is simply not the case for so many laws that are on the books. And so it's through those legally binding agreements that we're able to ensure that these rights are real on the ground for workers, and that model not only is now covering not just Florida tomatoes, but is in several crops and in 7 states up and down the East Coast, and is constantly in the process of growing and expanding and replicating. And we've also worked in collaboration with everyone from garment workers to dairy workers to construction workers to replicate that model. So it's a really exciting moment, and certainly one of the most exciting solutions. It was recently called the gold standard for social responsibility, replacing what has always been known as corporate social responsibility. So what we want to talk to you today about is that model a little bit more in detail, which Gerardo is going to get into, of how it actually works on the ground, because it is a lot of work if we're going to uproot hundreds of years of an economic system and an agricultural industry that has always relied on basically exploitative labor. It's going to take a lot of work, resources, time, energy, strategy. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what those mechanisms are, a little bit about how COVID has had an impact on the work that we do, and also just the broader impact that this program has had on the lives of workers. So Gerardo, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about how the program actually works on the ground on a day-to-day basis.
Sorry about that. We hear in many occasions in different settings about the problems that farm workers are facing, about the lack of protections, about the abusive behavior that is part of our reality every day. And one thing that resonates with what I want to share in terms of the importance, just to highlight what Marley was sharing, is that when we as workers are part of the process, are the driving force, but also the creating element within a program like this, then you are guaranteeing that rights that are necessary are included in the Fair Food Program, and that's what makes it work. But in our case, the process of education, it's very central, and that's how it all started for us. We started to go after the agreement was expanded to cover the entire Florida Tomato Growers Exchange, or FTG, representing about 90% of the tomato industry, and also having production in all of these different states that Marley mentioned. It's a lot of work, and we go and do sessions of education. We conduct them. Most of us from the Coalition of Immokalee Workers come from the background of working in the fields. I've been a farm worker myself since I was a kid, and for many years combined organizing with working in the fields, also harvesting a little bit of everything. But the importance of receiving that education from somebody who has been there, who knows exactly the tactics that people use to take advantage of other workers, seeing us inside the farm that in the past would never allow any kind of access, and in the present outside the program, there's zero intention of other farms in the country to do the same. So we have to push them. Education is key. The who does the education it's also extremely important. And it starts with the distribution of a booklet similar to this. This is just a sample from past seasons. Inside this booklet, there is clarification in regards to the bonus that comes paid by the corporations. It's a little bit more than a penny per pound, and that goes directly to cover all the tomatoes that any of the 14 corporations are buying from the farm in which you are doing your essential job. When that happens, they pay a little bit. And since the beginning of the implementation of the program in 2011, up to date, there's more than $35 million that have been distributed to workers in the form of a bonus. There's close to 3,000 complaints with the complaint mechanism and the auditing that takes place that also uncovers many problems that have all been reported and have been fixed. Many of these problems in the process of being investigated bring also other issues. So in total, there's been close to 10,000 problems, which represent the transformation without precedent that we are talking about. So when you talk about education, auditing, a hotline, we hear about hotlines. They don't necessarily work if the people that are going to be answering are not embedded in the reality that workers are aiming to change by complaining. When there are consequences that are negative against you, and that's what happens in many places. In our case, we have a 1-800 number, and that's where the workers call. They will be at, their answer will be called, and their complaint will be investigated. And if it's in violation with anything that is included here, including the right to complain without retaliation, the right to work free of sexual harassment and sexual assault being zero tolerance, modern day slavery, the same thing, forces the industry with the power of the market saying, we're gonna continue buying as long as you respect these rights that are included in this booklet. That's what makes sense. And that's when a hotline stops being just a number and becomes a very important tool, when there are the mechanisms, when there are the legally binding agreements between workers, their representatives, corporations, the growers, and we are ready to do the same thing, to advance with the goal of guaranteeing dignity and respect for workers in the fields. All of this is only possible because of the incredibly huge buying power the corporations that have signed on to this are lending by signing onto and committing with the community of Immokalee and in all the states in which they are producing. So I will say this for now, and there's also a lot of work that we have not even mentioned in regards to COVID, for example. So I'm gonna ask Marley to share a little bit about how all of this, has also served for us to be able to create that protocols and mechanisms to bring protections to workers in these times in which we have been forgotten.
Yeah. So as much of the country, back in March, the pandemic arrived like a massive tidal wave and swept away everything that we thought we were going to do this year, what we thought life would be like. It's been incredibly challenging. And of course, farm workers are among the most vulnerable workers in the time of this global pandemic. They have essential jobs. They have to keep going out to work. They have poverty wages for the most part across the country. And so many workers just don't have the luxury of missing work. And so even if they are sick, given the lack of social support and living paycheck to paycheck, sometimes you have to choose between recuperating in your home and quarantining and potentially losing your home altogether if you can't pay rent. So it's been quite a toxic brew. We also have really overcrowded housing in farm worker communities. People ride together on buses to work. So it's been really challenging. And we knew from the beginning as CIW that this was going to be a massive challenge for the farm worker community. And so we were able to mobilize really quickly, not just on an advocacy level of ensuring that that farm workers in particular here in Florida got the basic resources and protections they need and information they needed, but also were able to build on the Fair Food program. So at this point, we have an entire decade's worth of human rights infrastructure already in place. All of the things Gerardo mentioned, education, which we already go out to the farms to do education. We have a hotline set up and also a set of standards to ensure that workers are safe and protected and respected on the job. And so we were able to work with our grower partners through the working group of the Fair Food Program and develop the first ever privately enforced COVID protocols that were able to be implemented this season. And again, they're actually enforced, right? So that hotline that for decades has been receiving, or for a decade has been receiving, calls about wage theft, calls about sexual harassment, and all of these issues that the Fair Food Program continues to cover now also has gone from simply a hotline to basically a lifeline for a lot of farm workers, especially because so many other avenues of seeking help of any kind or getting information or getting answers has been shut down by the pandemic. Fair Food Program has continued strong. The hotline received more calls than usual, 25%, there was a 25% increase in the amount of calls that we received. And because of the protections that we're now able to enforce through the program, farm workers are far safer on Fair Food Program farms. And unfortunately, we know that all too well by hearing about the horrific stories of workers that are on farms where there have been massive outbreaks, where there have been absolutely no protections in place versus workers who are on Fair Food Program farms and say they feel pretty safe. They feel like they have the support they need. They have the PPE that they need. They see the company taking their lives and their health seriously, and that really matters, because that's really what it comes down to and what the Fair Food Program is able to accomplish, not just with COVID, but again, with all of these fundamental human rights that people have and they see and feel being enforced around them, is that they feel like they're being treated like human beings. And that is absolutely how it should be. This is, and we've all come to have a very different transformed view of what essential work means, particularly those who have had the privilege of being able to stay at home and work throughout this pandemic. There's an entire infrastructure of workers who are keeping all of us alive and well. And so that, I think, is it's critical that essential workers have the protections that they need and have and are treated with dignity and respect. And I think that's what the Fair Food Program brings to the table. Again, it already has for the last decade, but it's become even more important now during the pandemic.
Yeah, and in terms of impact, I would just say, we have mentioned that this is transforming the lives of workers. It offers protections that don't exist anywhere else in U.S. agriculture. And they are also something that is inspiring workers in other parts of the United States and the globe. Marley was mentioning some of the collaborations that we have with migrant justice, for example. They are applying their Meal with Dignity program, following after the steps of the Coalition of Immobility Workers in bringing the market to be part of the solution instead of a perpetuating force of abuses that have always plagued the supply chains, not just in agriculture, but in other sectors. Construction in Minneapolis, with the collaboration we have with the textile industry. All of those things were only dreams that we as workers had when we began all of this. And that's what I want to say, as workers, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights meant nothing. Today, as workers, the recommendations in times of COVID around stay at home orders, the social distancing, things that are really most of the time impossible for workers to observe, because they are given the task of feeding the nation, but then the nation sometimes forgets about them. So what I want to say is, we have an opportunity here to not just talk about ideas that sound intellectually appealing. We're in front of an opportunity to actually support something that transforms people's lives. As Marley said, we are on our 7th state, but that's not the only place in which we're going to expand. There are conversations with people that have interest in other parts of the country, and we hope that people can support us, because this is something that requires the participation of everyone who recognizes that there are food in the table, thanks to families that sometimes don't have food on their own. So this fight, we must bring it to all of those who benefit from the the hard work that we do, while we also demand the protections that we need in times of COVID. We have a boycott of Wendy's. So if you can support us on boycotting them until they come to the table, we would be very grateful. And I know that sooner or later, we're going to be able to sit at the table with them. Other workers will benefit from it. And lastly, I would say, we're not asking this as a favor. We're not telling you stories of abuse so that you can feel sorry for us. We're asking this as people that have families, dreams, and want to see those dreams get to fruition. And those dreams are simple. We want to be able to feed our family in dignity. We want to be able to get home and be safe after a hard day of work and receive the benefits of our sweat. That's what we want. We want to feed the nation, but we deserve the same. And the nation owes us that, at least that. And we want to also ask people to support us on these efforts to get our community the access to vaccination, because it seems that our governments are falling short in all fronts. So thank you very much for having us. And I would say, let's keep the fight and let's support the things that we can see clearly working for thousands, dozens of thousands of workers right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Marley, do you have anything else right now to add, or should I go ahead with my questions?
You can go ahead. Thank you, Margaret.
Okay, great. Well, again, thank you both very much. So I have a couple questions, but I'll start with this big one and see if there's time for any others. So you did mention about collaboration with some other groups, migrant justice in the 7 states. Most of the people here at EcoFarm are from California and Western states. So, and there are, of course, 2 million plus farm workers in the country. What can you say to folks here who are watching this in terms of what folks can do towards recognizing first the needs, and then increasing the rights of farm workers and their families? And just keep in mind that the people here at EcoFarm who are watching include employees, farm managers, owners, educators, government, industry reps, and of course, activists. So thinking about the big country of 2 million plus farm workers, and many of us watching are on the West Coast, what do you have to say for folks here?
What I would say to that is that, it's not a secret in this country. It's almost as one of those truths that everyone understands. Workers are one of the poorest work forces and most exploited forces in the country. It's not a matter of us saying what the problems are, where it hurts. It's a matter of people listening and recognizing that without placing stereotypes on top of communities that are trying to organize, that are farm workers. Many of us didn't went to school, but that doesn't mean that we don't have the ability to sit at meetings and strategize and bring our experiences. Ultimately, that's what built the whole analysis that we're bringing forward. It doesn't come from people that come from a background of academia or anything like that. It comes from the people that are suffering, the protocols, everything that's part of what we are implementing. So what I would say is we're open to work with whomever it's interested in working with us with the goal, and that needs to be absolutely clear, with the goal of empowering workers to create their own solutions, and then we can look into parallels. But it needs to be an effort that is genuinely aiming to create power for workers and create the mechanisms in which promises that are made are complied with. What we have, it's not just a dream. It's not something that sounds good on paper. It's something that we can enforce, and the workers know that, and they see that every day. So I would say we're open, we are excited also, and we want to be able to implement this program, whatever it makes sense.
Exactly. And the only other thing I'd add to that, Margaret, is that, again, that's the collaboration level, which, again, we've worked with groups all over the world. And those have been groups that have approached the CIW and said, you know what, I think that model could work where I am. And so we continue to build those types of collaborations and relationships. And as Gerardo said, it's one of the most exciting frontiers of our work, and we're always open to those new opportunities and excited for them. And at the same time, especially for the people watching, this has been a national movement of all kinds of, because we all eat, right? And so there are always ways to plug in and support the CIW, regardless of the geography that you're living in. So whether it's helping with the Wendy's boycott, helping expand a new program we have called the Sponsor Program that works with smaller co-ops and small scale retailers. There's a ton of ways to get involved. And so reaching out and finding ways to build relationship with the CIW is always, we're always open to that. And I know that Gerardo and I would be happy to speak with anyone about opportunities for what that could look like. And this has been a coast to coast movement from day one when the Campaign for Fair Food was launched. So we really always invite that participation. It's one of the most beautiful things about the Fair Food movement is the kind of leadership and relationship that it builds between anyone in the community.
Great. I guess another question I have, thank you very much, is again coming from California, where there's a long history, albeit less strong now than it was historically, of union organizing among with farm workers in California and of course elsewhere. How does the Coalition of Immokalee Workers model differ? What are the opportunities to collaborate with some of the unions that are still alive and well in different parts of the country? And again, along the lines of collaboration across models as well, because there are different groups and organizations addressing similar problems in different ways: service organizations, labor unions, etc. So what can you say about, in the context of building movement and power among many groups that might in fact have slightly different models and approaches, but together can create more power and strength than any one organization or group can? So how can you speak to that?
What I would say to that is that, we have been analyzing the problems that have always take place in Immokalee, and one of the realizations very early for the coalition was that through legislation, through pushing in a way in which we're trying to change the laws here in Florida, it seems very hard. We have been able to do that, but backwards, by pushing for change, by bringing corporations, by creating protocols. We have been able to actually create legally binding protections for workers. When we think about the law, for example, and I'm mentioning this because it goes in the same line as the structures that are in place, right? The law becomes the base, and then the program builds on top. So the same can happen with different structures, because what we are aiming to do here is not something that is in conflict, that is different than that. I think that we gain more by looking at what is actually possible when you mix ideas like this with existing structures. So what I've seen is, in our case, it worked to go after the market. It is proving to be one of the most effective tools, and we're going to continue to do that. If that changes, we're going to adapt, because we are not married with anything that doesn't change the things that need changing for our communities. And in general, we have collaborated in the Campaign for Fair Food, for example, with different groups, including UFW. We have also been working with, as I said, the implementation of the program, which requires a lot from our organization. So we're also limited, but we do everything that we can to be able to bring our voice into spaces where it makes sense. And as I said, we're open as long as there is a genuine focus on empowering workers so that they can have control over the decisions that will impact their lives.
Exactly. And there's just two good examples of, Margaret, where how that has worked in different and is continuing to work. So for example, USWW, which works, of course, with janitors on the West Coast, we've collaborated closely with them. They've both supported us through the Campaign for Fair Food. We've done trainings and workshops with their members as well. So we have a lot of very fruitful partnerships with unions and many different types of industries. One of the most recent examples of worker-driven social responsibility that we've supported the replication of, like I mentioned, is in construction, which is also a very union-dense industry. So that's taking place in the Twin Cities and in Minneapolis. So as Gerardo said, the model that the CIW pioneered out of necessity, given the political reality and the legal system that we exist in Florida, nevertheless has proven to be something that is valuable and useful, has many elements that nevertheless can layer onto other systems that have stronger legal protections already in place, for example, whether it's industries or simply geographic regions. And so we've really, I think there's a lot of opportunity for collaboration there. And it's, again, something that we were always excited about. Again, we've spent quite a bit of time in California working with different groups out there. So always happy to come back, of course, post-pandemic.
Oh, that's great to know. Perhaps we'll be reconnecting with you all in the near future. Well, again, I want to thank you all very, very much. And I look forward to the rest of this EcoFarm conference. And I hope you all have the opportunity to participate in some of the other sessions that are coming up. So thank you again very much. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
We'd like to express gratitude to Margaret and our speakers, Gerardo and Marley. Please look into the chat for how to support the coalition's work. Now, before we transition into the second presentation, we invite you to take a 10-second stretch. Get comfortable, take a deep breath, and then we will roll into our next presentation.
I have the next three presentations of this keynote address, and it is my great honor to present them all. I'm going to read their descriptions in English because that's what I have, but the presentations will all be in Spanish. Following the presentations, I'll have a question or two. So the first person to speak is Millie Treviño Sauceda, and I'm honored and thrilled to be able to present Millie. I've known Millie for more than 20 years. We've worked together on pesticide issues, mostly in California, and recently at the national level. So I'm thrilled to have Millie with us here today. Millie was born in Bellingham, Washington, to a migrant farm worker family. Millie worked in agricultural fields since age 8. Millie was a union organizer with the UFW in the 70s and 80s while raising her son as a single mom. She co-founded Mujeres Mexicanas and co-founded Líderes Campesinas in 1992, the first state-based farm worker women's grassroots organization where she served as executive director for 12 years. In 2011, Millie co-founded Alianza Nacional de Campesinas as the first national grassroots-based farm worker women's organization. Millie has won numerous awards for her tireless efforts, has earned multiple degrees, and sits on many advisory boards. I'm, again, thrilled to have Millie with us here today. After Millie will be her compañero, also with Alianza Nacional de Campesinas, Elvira Carvajal. Elvira is lead community organizer and co-founder of Alianza Nacional de Campesinas. She is from Michoacán, Mexico, where her parents were farm workers. She has worked picking lemons, okra, harvesting wheat, and in nurseries in Florida. As lead community organizer for Alianza, she works with farm worker groups, as well as organizations around the country, advocating to advance the rights of communities and farm worker women. Welcome, Elvira. And last but not least, we will hear from Rita Mancera Hernandez from the organization Puente, where she serves as executive director. It's located in Pescadero, California. She's been there now for 13 years. Rita's goals are to continue closing the gap in education for community members, increasing services so youth can succeed, expanding local leadership, and supporting local individuals and families to move out and stay out of poverty. Puente is the region's only community resource center providing critical resources to farm workers and their families, including healthcare, childcare, education, scholarships, food and nutrition assistance, legal and immigration assistance, rental assistance, and voter registration. Rita was born in Mexico City and grew up in Baja California Sur. So with that, we are going to proceed with Millie's presentation. And again, these presentations will all be in Spanish, as will discussion following that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I was 5 years old when I met Margaret. No, just kidding. I always say that. She's a lot younger. Thank you, Gabby, for inviting us to EcoFarm. It's a pleasure to be here with Margaret and Rita. Our presentation, I'll share it with you. We will be talking about what Alianza is, and we'll be presenting the information about why we decided to get this started, what motivated us, what areas we are getting involved in when it comes to pesticides, and what actions are we seeking, which are extremely important for the work that we do, representing farm working women. Say we're a national alliance of farm working women. We feel like under our culture and our traditions, woman is always working for her family. We brought our family together, our friends, our siblings, our parents, our nephews, our kids. We don't do this alone as women, but we have our own space to be able to plan and to make sure that we are mobilizing and make sure that we have a space. We are really good organizers. We are the center of our family. We as women make sure that our family is well organized. And if you help a person, then the whole family gets well organized, and you make everyone understand, and your own family supports you. So every time that we talk about a woman, she has a tribe. She has a group that helps her and helps her to have her own space. The mission of Alianza is to unify our fight for farm working women in a national movement. We want to make sure to have a greater visibility due to all the challenges that women face. If we give women visibility, farm working women, we open the doors to demand changes to guarantee her rights as human beings. Even if we say that everything got started in 2011, we had already been working for over 20 years trying to get together. And in 1991, when, like Margaret mentioned, we started with a group in Coachella Valley in California called Mujeres Mexicanas. And for the first time in history, we had conferences of farm working women for farm working women. Everything was in Spanish. Anything that we did was related to immigrant education or our churches or something like that. When we started that small group, we had up to 50 members participating. Our third conference is where we decided that since we were already making changes in our communities, inviting people from council, from school districts, where our community was not well represented, we could do a lot more. We helped a lot at clinics. We helped to change certain local regulations, and we realized that we could do this at a national level, but we wanted to get started at the state level. And for that same reason, we started our group to then become a national group. What does this mean? When we decided in 91 that we wanted to organize, we didn't know everyone that forms part of the group. Of this 15 organizations, some of them are here. The first one that we started with was the one that we started. It was called Líderes Campesinas. Through Líderes Campesinas, we started Campesinos Sin Fronteras. Ana Torres and I met in 91 and decided, hey, why don't we get a group together? And we decided to do so. So to make a long story short, like I mentioned before, the ones that are part of the movement, this is a movement, a female movement. We are women that have, through the years, been trying to make changes in our community at the local level, at the county level, at the state level, at the regional level, and at the national level, and at an international level as well. So by 2011, we decided to get together and we decided that it was important to do this. Here we have some pictures of the different organizations. One of the most amazing things that happened in 2011 when we were starting this first event, because we had done it in California before, we had organized women, but part of what we were trying to do, one of the first topics that we wanted to address was pesticides. And that issue was easier for us to work, to communicate through theater. With time in the 90s, we realized that woman violence was a challenge that we had to work against. If we didn't, it will be extremely hard for us to become a recognized group. So when we created Alianza in 2011, Eve Ensler, whose name is now B from B-Day, we collaborated, we met, she came to visit us in Washington, D.C., and with time, working with her in what we call 1 Million Rising, we did a lot of work in relationship to violence against women and girls. And we found a new way to call our movement. Farm working women. We call the movement Campesinas Rising. What we decided to organize, here you will see your screen. You'll see Elvira, you'll see me. We were in Georgetown University. That was the first meeting as a governing board for Alianza. And part of the things that we were talking about was that all the activities of all the groups that you can see here that we were organizing, they were all topics that we needed to talk about in our first get-togethers. Those were specifically to talk about the topics of violence against women, how our people is hurt in different ways, and it also includes the environment, how not only exploitation but also poisoning of our people, let it be at work or if they end up being nearby the areas where pesticides are applied. There's many communities surrounded by agriculture and their lives are not being respected. If chemicals are not used correctly, they've harmed many lives. By 2013, we had our first get together in Washington, D.C., and we started with the women there. We had around 75 farmers from 11 different states, and that's where we got our organizations represented. That's when we decided that we wanted to talk about 20 different topics. We all said all of these are very important. All of our organizations deal with some of these topics, some deal with others, but we decided that the topics and issues that needed our attention from those 15 organizations, we were talking about labor rights, violence against women, pesticides, and immigration. So in 2018, we ratified that those 4 pillars were still an issue, and Alianza needed to face them. When we decided that, it was because from all different organizations, we wanted to keep working and mobilize to face those challenges, and we created working groups for each one of the 4 priorities. I want to mention before moving on that in these images you have Indigenous women from different ways. They have taught us how to face the situations. Just like we say, hey, as a Latin woman, you need your space. You need to work within our context. They said the same thing. And we've been working a lot on this. Here is a list of the first governing board of Alianza. Some of our friends, of our allies, that have made sure that Alianza has the support that it needs. And the first meetings that we had since 2011, 2012, to be able to work at a national level, at a federal level, with different legislators and Congress people. Like you can see here, some of the fight for women, and we want to represent. Elvira, can you share a little bit about how we have been working with ladies and when it comes to pesticides? And lastly, I will try to share information about some of the lawsuits that we are involved in to make sure that the regulations that we've been pushing for that protect farm workers continue to work, because this last administration, as you could have seen yesterday, things were horrible, and he refuses to stop hurting our society. And for the same reason, there's plenty of programs and regulations that were put at a standstill. So please let us know a little bit about Jovita and some of the other female that we've been supporting. Well, like she said at the beginning, my name is Elvira. I've always been a farmer. My parents were farm workers. I worked picking lemons and wheat. Later on, I started working in nurseries. I knew nothing about the effect that pesticides will have in the human body. We never got any training. I learned about how harmful they were when I started working in the organization, and those topics are always touched on: prevention and poisoning by chemicals. And I saw how urgent it was to share this message with everyone. For many years, I worked really close to pesticides, not knowing what damage they could cause. So from that moment on, I felt like it was my responsibility, once I had the knowledge of what chemicals can do, then I felt it was my responsibility to bring this message to other farm workers. And we had trainings for many years. Now we keep working on those issues when it comes to pesticides. And Jovita used to work at a nursery, and she was sprayed while working. The tractor went by and she was sprayed just like a plant. She came to us to place a complaint, and we were able to help her to place a formal complaint. But that was in, I think, about 6 or 7 years. By this time, Jovita is fully blind, and she gets dialysis twice a week. Her health is not the best. And as Jovita, there's many people that don't share their story because they're afraid. They're afraid of losing their job. They're afraid of retaliation, especially if they're undocumented. It's a huge issue that has existed and has harmed farm working women for a long time. And now we add COVID to all of this. So recently we found, I don't know if there was another picture of a lady whose hands are hurt. This lady when COVID started, we were looking for testimonials from people that have been exposed to pesticides. And I met a lady and I asked her, hey, do you know anyone who has been exposed? And she said, my sister, but she wouldn't share because she's ashamed and she is scared. Why is she ashamed? Oh, because her hands are fully hurt. She can't sleep because her hands are itching. To make a long story short, I had to call her 3 or 4 times, and I shared with her that I have been exposed as well and how pesticides affected me. She was able to give me her testimonial. And I told her, please send us some pictures because we need to have pictures to prove that laws are being broken, that distances are not being respected. And she sent us pictures of her hands. She says that doctors have prescribed creams, lotions, and nothing has helped her. We've heard of many different cases, and we asked them because at Alianza, we collect testimonials all year long for the 4 pillars of our organization. And I found many women who are afraid they will lose their jobs. They don't say anything. Application rules are not respected. Before, the distance from a pesticide was 100 feet, and now they want to change it to 25. Rather than having situations improve, they are lobbying to make them worse. At the beginning, they said, well, they are essential workers, and we are essential workers, but we have no rights because with the pandemic, social distancing is not followed. There was a lot of COVID cases in a huge nursery here because social distancing was not observed and protective equipment was not provided. We've always worked to improve these conditions, and nowadays we have even less inspectors because of the pandemic. The workers are there during the pandemic because it's important. If we don't have food, then we will eat. Our concerns right now is about mothers who bring in their children who are having sleeping problems, they're overweight, they are bullied at school because they've gained weight. So we see that pesticides are hurting farm working women's health because we are the ones that get paid the worst. We have no benefits. There's no medical benefits, and we're not protected. We don't receive government help. The stimulus checks didn't make it to farm working women, but we are considered essential workers. lastly, I wanted to add that Alianza is involved in many lawsuits, and they're against the government. One, for what Elvira just said, under protection standards for farm workers, under EPA, in 2015 under Obama's administration. After lots of work, Margaret was involved. We pushed, and many of the groups in Alianza, for years we had fought to have better regulations, and one of the regulations that we were asking for and what's approved was the application, the safety area when you apply a pesticide, up to 100 feet away from the area of application so that no farm worker is near the application area. And in October of last year, the government decided that by January, a new law will come into effect, reducing that distance to only 25 feet. So Alianza with other groups like Asociación Rural, Asociación Campesina that form part of Alianza, and Rural and Migrant Ministry, CATA, and UFW, we all got together, and with the support of Farmworker Justice and Earth Justice, we started this claim against the US EPA, and the judge has granted us an order where this new regulation is on hold until they are able to review if that law was appropriate or not. So right now we're working on this. And lastly, another thing that I want to mention is that since 2008, we've been working with other organizations in another lawsuit because of detention centers. You know, everything that's been on the news about how our people are being treated under this administration, those detention centers for families, that they're pushing to build more of those family detention centers and military bases. And that's intentional to build them in areas where there's a lot of toxic waste. And us, along other organizations, we decided to push for it. And this is one of the agencies that is helping us. We're talking about 3 military bases: Tornillo, Forklift, and Big Fall. And part of what we're trying to do is to stop this from happening so that we're not exposed to it. There's a lot of work that we're doing when it comes to working on the harm to our communities due to the use of pesticides and many other environmental harms. We'll stop and see if Margaret has a question so that Rita can share her information. Thank you so much. We want to keep going. I know that you have tons to share, but we don't have tons of time, so thank you so much. Now we want to hear what Rita has to say. Thank you for inviting us, and it's a pleasure to speak Spanish and go straight to the ears of our people and be able to share this space with other organizations that are doing an excellent job. I want to share about Puente of found in San Mateo County in California, is in the Bay Area, has a lot more regulations. In past years, in the 70s and 80s, even in the 90s, Puente was fighting for justice and to improve working conditions, and things have improved when it comes to law and documents and guidance, but we're still concerned about the conditions that we see in farms and nurseries and ranches. And if we stop to think about it, the written law has things that are amazing for people, but then you go and visit a farm, depending on where we go, it's not that the laws are being broken, it's that people are not being treated respectfully. They're not seen as this intelligent human being, as a human being full of all the strengths and everything that they bring when they come into the country. That's what we are working on here at Puente. We have plenty of programs, and we appreciate that they're promoted by the community. We specialize in housing, health, and in education. The area where we live is a rural area. It's a small area. We have about 5,000 residents, and we have been able to focus in this bubble to improve the community, the local community. But when it comes to housing, obviously farm working salaries are extremely low, so 2 or 3 families have to live together to be able to pay rent. And in this area, since we are in the South Bay, is hard to build. So there's not tons of homes that are available. Like Millie was saying, people here let lots of practices slide because they're afraid to lose their housing. It's not easy to move from one home to the next. And I think this will surprising for you, but people pay $1,000 for a trailer. We are talking about how expensive the county is. Housing prices are really high. And if a farmer has to pay at least that amount for a 2-bedroom home, you can't find it under $2,600 here. So there's no housing regulation. When it comes to childcare, we're steps away from Silicon Valley, where people go and work and they take their kids to the childcare. We don't even have one childcare that's licensed in this whole area, in these 4 towns that we serve. So while we did, many parents requested that we started a cooperative with families. The funding has to come from some places because we can't ask families to pay. We have to professional teachers. They can bring their kids. Parents also participate, but that's the only children's center that's available. It's obviously closed right now because of COVID, but when it comes to health, particularly this year, we've had to increase our role in the community. I've heard in the news that in Watsonville, Santa Cruz, there's a huge number of cases because of the pandemic. Thankfully, in South Bay, because we've been working with other universities, we started testing for COVID, and we went to farms. We ran tests in the community. But we also went to all nurseries. We have a small community, but since March, we've only had 38 cases. And if someone gets a positive test result, it's laughable because the whole group gets organized. We see how to bring food to the family, how to make sure that they can recoup their wages. Some people don't want to get tested so that they don't have to stop working. And like we tell them, we have funding available to cover your wages. And that makes it easier for them to keep getting tested. And if there's a positive test result, they don't lose anything. We are able to cover their lost wages. When it comes to advocacy, something concerns me about agriculture. If people are not feeling safe, if wages are still low, if there's no medical benefits, we usually see this. If people register in our education programs and they learn English, or through our legal services, they get a visa or get a DACA permit, then they step away from agriculture, and we're endangering agriculture. Agriculture is really important. That's where all our food comes from. So we need to pay attention and how we can improve working conditions for farm people, because otherwise they're going to move to a different industry. And we see people that actually enjoy working in agriculture. The way in which they describe their work with the soil, with the plants, with the vegetables they harvest, the joy in seeing where the products that they work on go. We need to work together to make sure that those working conditions keep them in the industry. Something that we've seen that we don't talk a lot about in this area. I love the pictures of your picketing. We don't talk about sexual harassment in the workplace. We don't talk about it a lot because women are afraid to report those people that are harassing them. They're afraid to lose their job, but they're also afraid to share their situations with their own families. We hear of the cases because they come, we help them to file a claim or a police report, and many a times we send them to immigration lawyers because they have the right to a visa for helping to solve a crime. But as women, we don't like to share about these types of things. And it's something that comes from our countries of origin where harassment already exists. And there's a disconnect between how to report, for example, if your boss doesn't even speak Spanish, and it's hard to understand. I've had in the Pescadero area people that farm owners that say, Rita, that doesn't happen here. We don't see it. And then I tell them, we are helping 7 women from your own farm to file a claim or a police report. So we need to feel safer. There's lots of harassment at work. What we've noticed is that rules are not being broken, but people are treated as if they were different. They're not the same as other employees, and those are the things that we want to improve on. And I feel like we are responsible. It is our responsibility as farm working organizations to think about the next generation. The young people that we work with, because we have scholarships, we support them to go to college, we help them to fill out applications if they don't qualify. What we've heard is that of all the children of farm workers in this area, I think that I only know 2 families whose kids are involved in farming. The rest don't want to be involved in agriculture because they've seen for years the work and the hours that their parents have put in, the wages that they get, the lack of opportunity. This type of conferences, I think, should help us to think as a group. If we really want to invest in agriculture and in the next generations, how are we going to change the situations that exist right now so that the next generation actually wants to remain in the agriculture and the industry of agriculture. That's amazing for everyone. How are we going to continue with agriculture in the future that brings everyone with the experience and the joy for what they do, but with the dignity and the respect that everybody deserves? Thank you so much. That is an amazing way to finish this. I don't know if we have a lot of time for questions, but I'll make a little comment that brings together all the presentations that we've heard today. One of the things that thankfully we're talking with people in the fields of organic or sustainable agriculture that uses pesticides the least. But everybody else, all the issues that you ladies have mentioned and that have been mentioned from the people from Coalition of Immokalee Workers, all those issues are still there. The fear, the violations of labor rights, immigration issues, etc., etc. So for this community that we are talking to, there's plenty to be done. We can all get together to, first of all, recognize publicly, and secondly, solve those issues. But everything that you mentioned as well, the solution is not going to come from the outside. It comes from the community. It comes from the voices of the people, of the workers and their families. And that is a message that is extremely important for everybody that's listening here today and that are working in different areas of agriculture, in small, medium, and large scale family farmers, organic farmers. Those issues and those solutions should be based on the voice of the people and the power of the workers. And that's the power behind agriculture. That's where all production comes from. I feel like, Elvira, you have something to say? Yes, Elvira is working a lot and we have a project. Do you want to talk about sustainable ag? Let's say Elvira will have the last words, and then thank you so much, ladies. Thanks to all 5 presenters today. Going back to farming, we know that farming is an endangered industry because large corporations only care about money. They don't care about our health. At Alianza, we are working hard on this, and we mentioned farmers. Everyone that's a farm worker, we know the soil. We know, without having studies, we know if there's a pest. We know when it will harvest, when it will be time to harvest, why there's no yield. We know that what we eat is what's harming us. For example, the government is not helping us. Right now, we are working with community farms without chemicals. With COVID, people are refusing to go to the hospitals, first of all, because of how low their wages are. If in California wages are low, here are much lower. So people have to live together. We have to have 4 or 5 families together. And our governor was criticizing this, saying here in family farms, we don't have enough land, but we have women growing behind their homes in a small space that's 4 by 12. We have cultural foods. We don't want any canned goods. We can grow beans, we can grow tomatoes, fresh food. Behind my home, we have about 29 different healing herbs. And you don't know how many people call me because in Asociación Campesina, we decided to have a pharmacy. So we have ancestral remedies, and people during the pandemic are using homemade syrups, and I also tell them we can't get exposed. We are working with home remedies to cure ourselves because the hospitals are not giving us anything. We are working on this home gardens. You can grow enough to feed your family even if you only have a small space. Let's use this as the closing words with hope. Let's hope that we can use the knowledge of all this have worked in the farming industry for so long. I thank you for your time, for your knowledge, and for sharing your time with us. Thank you. Big hug for you. Thank you.
All right. I think that closes our keynote. Thank you again to Millie, Elvira, and Rita, and to all our presenters and moderator, Margaret. Please look for ways to support them and collaborate with them in the chat. Let this be a call to greater sustained action and collaboration led by farm workers and their families.